What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. So Riot are constantly combing the champion roster, trying to figure out which outdated picks are in the most serious need of updates. And despite the fact that Riot has recently been reworking champions at a ridiculous rate, there's still quite a lot of champions out there that have yet to receive any changes, even though they definitely need it and Riot definitely wants to give them. So today we're taking a look at 7 new champions that have recently, very recently actually, been confirmed for upcoming reworks, along with the sizes of those reworks and what we could potentially be able to expect from them. This video is sponsored by RapidX Gaming Chairs. We're doing a giveaway with them where we'll be giving away a free chair and a ton of other stuff as well, and it's super easy to enter. All you have to do is just check the Gleam link in the description below, and the winners are going to be announced later on Twitter. And so if you guys enjoyed the video, definitely hit that like button, and let's get started. So almost 2 years ago, Riot made a music video for a much-loved champion who's been around since the start of the game really, Amumu. So despite the video at the time being really well received and actually building up a lot of hype for Amumu, he's still in a pretty poor shape in terms of actual gameplay, which is pretty surprising as a lot of people expected some kind of rework after that video went live way back in the day at the time. Unlike a lot of other champions, whether they had full dedicated gameplay updates or maybe just tweaks and roster updates, Amumu doesn't really have that many health issues in the game in terms of actual balance. Amumu's tanky, he can deal a decent amount of magic damage, and he's reasonably easy to learn the jungle with and packs enough crowd control to make a decent impact on the game. Sometimes he can maybe go out of balance if the game's favoring tank initiators way too much, but for the most part his kit's pretty simple, and as a result doesn't cause too many issues. The counterplay with Amumu is usually pretty fair. The issue with Amumu is that he can potentially be a little bit boring to play for some people, I guess, and oftentimes his gameplay is really straightforward and repetitive, and especially he can often get outclassed by other tanks in the meta. And Amumu has finally been confirmed for a rework by Riot in the future. We don't know whether it's a large-scale update to his gameplay and art, or if it's going to be just like a smaller rework to make his kit a little bit better, but we figured that the goal will definitely be to make Amumu a little bit more interesting to play, as well as to just bring him up to date with the modern champions of the day. Amumu's definitely a pretty, or at least one of the more iconic champions in League, and as a result is probably going to be pretty easy to modernize, even with just a smaller scale rework. The next champion confirmed for a rework is Fiddlesticks, who's another super old champion that has received quite a few tweaks over the years, but no real proper rework to actually bring him up to date. For a lot of people, myself included actually, I'm just realizing that now, Fiddlesticks was the beginner jungle champion. Fun fact, Fiddlesticks was actually the first champion I ever played in League of Legends. Thanks to Fiddlesticks' drain ability that makes, staying alive while clearing a breeze in the jungle, he's quite a great champion to start jungling out with for beginners. And he's pretty iconic in terms of his playstyle and appearance, and although he's definitely stood the test of time, like Amumu, Fiddlesticks could definitely use a nice gameplay update to make him a little bit less linear, give him some more interesting decisions to make in the game, and, well, right now Fiddlesticks is kind of all about pressing E, pressing your W, and then I guess that's kind of it, right? Like, there's not really that much to his clear in the jungle, not really that much to his early game fights. His mechanics are quite basic, and once you unlock his ultimate, you get the chance to make way more interesting plays, do some really cool, even game-changing stuff. But before that, and when his ultimate's on cooldown, he can be quite repetitive, and every single game is essentially just farming until level 6, and then you start ulting every single lane when you can. The biggest thing that can affect Fiddlesticks' gameplay is definitely being invaded in the jungle. If the enemy jungler has like a strong early duel power, or maybe some just good knowledge of how to sneak up on Fiddle, there's probably not that much that you can do about it. It's going to be a little bit tricky to even just escape, if anything, and most of the time you'll probably end up dead and just getting set super far behind. Rework-wise, we would expect maybe his Drain and his Crowstorm abilities to stick around on the kit, but for the rest of his abilities, he could probably use some more strategic tools that could maybe introduce some more choices, some more options for the games that you play with Fiddle, or maybe just give him some early dueling power in a 1v1 to make up for the fact that his early ganks as well are actually pretty awful. Next up on the list, it's Nocturne, and he continues our current theme of old champions with kits that are kind of just pretty basic to the point of the fact that they're maybe just a little bit outdated compared to newer releases. Nocturne's a little bit more of a special case compared to Amumu and Fiddlesticks because, unlike the others, he does have quite a lot more interactivity built into his actual kit. With Amumu, you kind of just press Q, and if you hit it, you kind of just throw down your tantrums and cry on some people. With Fiddlesticks, you maybe land a Fear or Dark Wind, and you just sit still and use your Drain. When it comes to Nocturne, though, the core of his gameplay is a lot more complex and more interesting mechanically for sure. Maybe it comes down to a gap closer with his Q, lockdown with the Fear. The Spell Shield's a great tool that gives him a lot of interesting situations for sure. Lets you spend some time, predicting abilities, gives you that nice outplay potential. It's not a huge amount of variance compared to some of the newer releases, but it is definitely enough to make Nocturne a slightly lower priority than the other two champions. So the main reason actually that Nocturne is due for a rework is because his character takes up a lot of really awesome design space as sort of like this living nightmare, but he's really just not all that terrifying, at least to the point where he delivers on that archetype well. And potential of the archetype is a really big target for Riot currently. It was a big thing with the Warwick rework that they were trying to accomplish of that whole archetype of being like a werewolf kind of character. So we could definitely expect to see something super epic for Nocturne in the future because it's just such a cool concept that Riot could definitely do some really interesting stuff with it. And the fourth champion we're taking a look at today that has been confirmed for a rework is Tryndamere, and that sounds like it could be a pretty interesting one for Riot to tackle actually. Tryndamere is a pretty iconic character in League of Legends as he's one of the more well-known of the original champion roster. But despite his relatively simple kit, I think it's fair to say that a lot of players are really fond of how Tryndamere currently plays. He's one of these top laners that doesn't really need to worry about grouping up with his team. He has a very unique play style, and he's better off usually just split pushing and dueling all game and then maybe forcing the enemy to answer to his split push strategies. And Riot Meddler and Riot Reeve 3 both offered a little bit of context for what Riot would potentially want to focus on for a Tryndamere rework, which is that they would like to make him a little bit less dependent on split pushing and be able to at least contribute a little bit to a team fight, or well, a little bit more really. Right now, the fact that all Tryndamere can do is split push kind of makes him a little bit linear, gives him, it kind of limits his playstyle really, but if his kit had a way to allow him to be effective in a team fight, he'd probably be much better received and more fun to play overall. Next up, we're looking at Teemo actually. Now, Teemo's a champion that has been able to avoid the need for a visual update, mostly because of the fact that he kind of receives quite a lot of high quality skins from Riot. But he's definitely on the list for that full visual and gameplay update eventually. Unfortunately for you Teemo mains out there, it's gonna be a long ways away because Riot have said there's just so many more champions that need their visual gameplay update much more urgently than Teemo. Teemo, at least out of the champions on this list, is probably going to be the one that receives his rework the latest. And with Teemo, I gotta say, it's potentially even possible that he doesn't get this for multiple years, which actually could, I guess, maybe even be a good thing for those Teemo mains right now, if you're a huge fan of how he plays, because that visual gameplay update could potentially change that quite considerably, or at least that's been the case so far. Riot have actually gone on record before and mentioned that some upcoming visual gameplay updates might not actually change gameplay all that much in the future, since visual gameplay update essentially just means that Riot wants to clean up a champion to the standard of which they develop their new champions, and that's something that definitely applies to Teemo. His gameplay could be considered a little bit linear, I guess, but attack speed based champions typically have a little bit more complexity, and Teemo has definitely a lot of hidden complexity thanks to his attack spacing, the amount of importance you have to put on his positioning as well, so a Teemo update might have more of a focus on updating art assets and lore especially. Now, the next two champions that are confirmed for reworks are actually kind of a bit of a special case because, well, Riot have said that they are almost certainly going to be reworked together. And we are talking about Kayle and Morgana, who are tied together in the lore in a similar kind of way, I guess, to maybe Diana and Leona, but it's definitely a bit different though, with Kayle and Morgana being sisters in the lore and on the opposite sides in a conflict between an immortal race of winged beings. Now, both champions are, I think it's fair to say, pretty outdated, but they definitely have aged extremely well in terms of their actual gameplay, and they're definitely still characters that are relevant today. Morgana was confirmed to be the most likely to receive gameplay changes, but both would be great targets for Riot to deliver better on the Angel and Fallen Angel archetypes. Kayle's gameplay seems a little bit more simple on paper, I guess, but as we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of decision making and positioning involved in making the most out of an attack speed based champion. So Kayle's actually a lot more flexible than you could originally think just by looking at her kit on paper. Morgana, on the other hand, is actually a little bit linear. You save your allies with your shield, you land some bindings to assist on your kills, and occasionally you maybe go for a play with your ultimate. Overall, Morgana's kit could probably be a little bit more interactive, and a lot of frustration could be maybe taken away from playing against Morgana if Riot perhaps shuffled around her power a bit and make it less about landing her bindings. Either way, the focus for a Morgana or Kayle rework would definitely be on the art side, so we'd maybe get skin, splash, and in-game model updates to just make both of them look so much more epic, and also some new updated lore, of course, to fully flesh out their backgrounds and properly explain things about their race and the conflict that they're fighting in. Now, for all of these champions, they aren't necessarily going to receive full visual gameplay updates. They could definitely just be receiving mini reworks, maybe to buy some time for the future, and maybe they get a mini rework, maybe they get a full gameplay update after a mini rework way down the line once the more urgent champions are out of the way. Now, although these were the 7 champions we wanted to talk about in this video that have been recently officially confirmed, technically there are 3 more champions that we could have talked about in this video that were confirmed a while back. Now, those champions are Dr. Mundo, Corki, and Cho'Gath, but we've actually talked about them in a previous video before, so we didn't want to get too much into depth on them. Maybe once Riot releases some more information about what we could expect for those reworks, we'll make a video covering them in a more in-depth way. Either way though, that's just about going to wrap up today's video on the new champions that have been recently confirmed to be getting some kind of rework in the future. They're all great candidates for full visual gameplay updates, but given the time that it takes to put out that sort of scale of a rework, it's likely that Riot will figure out some smaller changes to make in the meantime, to make sure that those champions stay relevant until they can be fully revitalized. Either way though, looks like that's going to be it from me. If you guys enjoyed the video, drop a like, subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.